Hello, welcome back to another episode of Examining the Witness. So, today we're going to be talking about this sound jungle that you see before you. It's an interesting area for a couple of reasons, and even though I don't really like the puzzles in it, the sound puzzles, uh, it it's thematically important to the game, and I appreciate what it's trying to do and why it needs to be in the game. And I'm also going to use this episode to talk about something that I think I've neglected a bit in previous episodes, which is the meaning of the environmental puzzles, the traceable environment paths that are sort of the reason for the core mechanic of the game. They're the most important single thing that's unique about the Witness. And I feel like I haven't talked enough about those in previous episodes. I've gotten wrapped up in describing the sequences of puzzles, which I really love, and I've been talking about the architecture of the different structures and what that tells us about the theme and the lore of the island and things like that. But I haven't been talking enough about the environmental puzzles, so I'm going to turn that around in this jungle area, which has some really stunning and beautiful environmental puzzles. And Another thing that I'm going to use this episode for is that I I feel like previously I've always brought up this duality between the first-person conscious awareness knowledge and the kind of third-person objective scientific world knowledge, and I feel like I can talk a little bit about that scientific world side of things, both in terms of the themes when it's quoting all these physicists, and in terms of doing the analysis on the puzzles. But I haven't been able to talk as eloquently about that other side of that duality. I tend to just end up repeating myself and saying words like consciousness and awareness a lot without talking in much concrete detail. So I'm going to try and fix that a little bit this episode. It'll be a bit of an experimental episode. We'll also go through the puzzles, of course, although we'll have to dodge some of the little bird song that happens. So it's a beautiful area. I love this beach. Beautiful tree. It's got that one gigantic tree up there, which we'll talk a lot more about later. So in the last episode, we were in the monastery, which I claimed was also all about the environmental puzzles and about the kind of meditative awareness end of that first-person, third-person spectrum that the Witness is often very concerned with. But the monastery is different from the jungle. Because among other things, the monastery is a human structure, and it's an old, decayed human structure. It's from from the Middle Ages, like the castle. Previously, we were also talking about the desert temple, and so the monastery represents a distinct historical philosophy. It represents this sort of Eastern Buddhism and Taoism and things. I guess particularly Zen Buddhism, and it's also a tutorial area where I was talking about the gourds and how those form kind of a tutorial for the environmental puzzles, and how the panel mechanic here is kind of a crossing over point where the panel mechanic becomes the closest that it ever gets, so one of the closest places that it ever gets to the environmental puzzle mechanic. So it's kind of a tutorial and introduction, and it's also it represents a historical philosophy and a bit of an institution, a teaching institution. Remember, we watched that Tarkovsky video about, among other things, like the effort of maybe carrying things forward through time, carrying forward the knowledge to future generations, teaching and learning, that kind of thing. So that leaves the question, like, how does this monastery stuff apply to me personally in my life in the world today? And the forest, or the jungle, is a bit of an answer to that question in its themes. It's more silent. It's less didactic or pedagogical. It's not trying to teach you all this stuff, because it's just an empty natural space, so it's, in a way, it's almost more purely connected to those kind of meditative themes than the monastery, which has all these murals about various things. So before we even start with the puzzles, we're going to lead in with what I think is just one of the most beautiful and and to me, one of the most shocking realizations in The Witness, which is the environmental puzzle, like right here. It's to me, this is just one of the most beautiful of these shapes in the game. It's absolutely massive when you consider the size of the giant trees back there and the way all these things come together. I mean, of course, there are tricks like this get pulled elsewhere in The Witness, and even many other video games have dabbled in this kind of like, line up different things to the right place so it makes a special shape kind of thing. But my personal experience with this was I encountered this after I had finished most of the island. I was kind of wandering around. I felt like I had already gotten all the lasers. I had seen the ending. I was kind of mopping up the endgame stuff, and it kind of felt like, well, the island doesn't have anything more to offer me. I've done it. I've kind of, it felt a little bit sad because it was this beautiful, amazing masterpiece game, and it was starting to I was starting to run out of new things that it had to show me. And then you see this like out of nowhere, right? You just look up, you're like, staring at an audio log or something, and you look up and like, there it is. So this is a great environmental puzzle, and we'll talk a lot more later about the overall symbolism of the environmental puzzles with the Rupert Spira video that's over in the shipwreck. But what makes the ones in the jungle particularly powerful is they're these negative space puzzles, right? It's the sky behind the objects, and that's connected to these two audio logs right here. So we're gonna just take this environmental puzzle and then discuss those audio logs before we dive into the puzzles. One more thing to notice is, of course, I mean, maybe this is a little bit too cute, but to me, I can't shake the feeling that it's kind of in the shape of a question mark, and that feels like a bit of a statement. It feels a little bit like it's like that's a bit of an announcement of the theme of this area. Is the monastery is teaching about all these things, but the sound area is kind of the full, direct, slightly inaccessible meditative theme, which involves doubt, and it involves a direct investigation of your moment-to-moment experience. You can't take things on faith because you read out of a textbook or something. You've got to be asking yourself, what is my experience like in this moment, in order to really have access to that first-person truth. But now, having said that we need to investigate for ourselves, we're just going to listen to what some famous dead people from 1,000 years ago said in this pair of audio logs. So we'll start with this one.
We join spokes together in a wheel, but it is the center whole that makes the wagon move. We shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. We hammer wood for a house, but it is the inner space that makes it livable. We work with being, but non-being is what we use. Lao Tzu, 6th century BC.
So that's an interesting quote. Of course, Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching, the founding text of Taoism, and the paradoxical statement there, and the Tao Te Ching is full of these sort of paradoxical statements. It connects a little bit to the Zen koans, and it connects a little bit to the paradoxical, visible, invisible type speech of Nicholas of Cusa. I haven't talked very much about paradox in The Witness. It comes up a lot in Electron Dance's video, The Unbearable Now, but I've kind of been trying to distance myself from that video and from that interpretation, because I feel like in that video, as I've said before, I feel like he just kind of ignoring all of the real concrete meanings. Like The Witness isn't just talking about abstract truth, it's talking about all of these specific things, about vision, about sound, about philosophy and science. But there is one thing that he's totally spot on right about, is that The Witness does have this profound sense of paradox embedded in it, and this Taoist quote is one element of that. So maybe we'll find a way to talk more about that later. It's also, of course, the quote literally is about negative space. So the space inside the pot being what we use to carry liquid is a obvious match for the negative space of this environmental puzzle being the relevant part of the shape, even though there's nothing that actually makes this. It's only defined by the objects that are outside of it. But in both cases, it's a metaphor, right? Like Lao Tzu isn't talking about how to make a wheel. People already know how to make wheels. He's talking about the Taoist ideas of being and non-being, which I'm not that familiar with, but it sounds to me a little bit like the Buddhist concept of emptiness, which again is also a super subtle concept that I will not be able to summarize appropriately on the fly here, but is related to a sense that nothing in the universe has independent existence in and of itself. Everything is interdependent and relational, and there aren't you can't have like if you're looking at a flower, you can't, there's not a flower essence somewhere in it, and if you take away all of the non-flower things that make up the flowers, like the atoms, the colors, the smells, the forces, whatever you decide are the constituent parts of that, then there would be nothing left. There's no secret flower essence, which seems obvious when you're talking about a flower, but then when you're talking about maybe a self or the overall universe, then that becomes a more interesting philosophy. So with Taoism, with that quote, he's trying to he's making an analogy between the empty pot and this sort of non-being that's an important part of Taoist philosophy. And these environmental puzzles are also a metaphor, right? Like just the existence of the mechanic stands for something, and that's why it's in the game. So, which is interesting in the puzzles, in the panel puzzles, it's not really a metaphor. It's just a direct representation of what's going on, which is that you're solving the panels, and that's giving you're kind of making hypotheses and testing things, and you're building up theories about how the world works, and that represents that kind of scientific hierarchical process of building knowledge. Versus the environmental puzzles, they're kind of just a finger pointing at the moon. They're a reference to a shift to the shift that happens when you start looking at the world in what Rupert Spira would describe as a non-dual way, and when you become aware of your own awareness, none of your sense input changes, but you're thinking about it in a new way, and the environmental puzzles embody that shift in a number of ways. So for one, when you encounter an environmental puzzle, as I've mentioned before, it's shocking, it's sudden, it's direct. It's not, you don't have to go through a logical process to uncover them or unlock them most of the time. A few of them have mild game mechanical things going on, and I think that's kind of interesting. But for the most part, they're immediately accessible, and that's a mirror to the mental shift that Jonathan Blow is alluding to here, and that will be discussed later on with Rupert Spira, which is a shift that's always there. It's not like you have to, wait 30 years and it happens to 1 in a million people that become enlightened or something. Maybe there are things like that are possible. Maybe there's some kind of super mental state that exists, but that's not what Spira seems to be talking about. It's one thing that I thought was very interesting, and I'll link to this in the video. Rupert Spira, in his most popular online YouTube video. There's a woman that asks, basically, why am I not enlightened yet? I've been working at this for so many years, and it's frustrating. And his response is super interesting and super clear, and also a kind of unintentionally fantastic explanation of the metaphor in The Witness, because he says, imagine you're watching a movie, and you're involved in all of the stories that are and the adventures that are happening in the movie, and then someone else walks into the room and they say, look at the screen. What do you have to do in order to look at the screen? And the answer, of course, is that you don't really have to do anything. You don't have to get up and change the channel. You don't have to turn the television off. You don't have to look at some oblique angle. You just suddenly pay attention to the fact that, oh yeah, all of this stuff that I was looking at, all of this like amazing 3D world and all of these colors and everything, this is actually this flat colored surface that I'm seeing. And the metaphor there is that you're looking around in your daily life, and you're experiencing the movie is all of your concerns and your desires and your actions, like all of your knowledge of your relationships with your friends, and all your obligations, things you have to do, and whether you're feeling hungry and maybe you're going to go get some food. But then you can step back instantly and just remember that you have this visual field, and you're experiencing all of the sense information, and you're a conscious being in the world, and that it sounds like you're like stepping into a moment of prayer or repose, but it doesn't even have to be that. You could be in the middle of driving and you just continue driving, but it is a kind of instantaneous shift that is well summarized by Rupert as being similar to watching the movie and then realizing that you're looking at a screen. Or Sam Harris, who I'm going to recommend again later as maybe a more accessible intro to the ideas that Rupert Spira is trying to explain, is also at one point he said that people think that the meditative experience is something deep, like you have to go like into the depths of thought and experience in order to drag it out, but it's actually something shallow in the sense that it's on the surface. And he had a very similar analogy, which I think was just constructed independently, which is, imagine you're looking out a window and you're seeing all of this landscape and goings on, and cars driving and people passing and things like that, all happening out the window. And then you realize that you can see your reflection in the window. And it's shallow in the sense that it's right there in front of you. You're already looking at it. So it's hard to say what's changed, but it's a shift in your attention that's changed. So that's basically my pitch for what the environmental puzzles represent in The Witness, is that they're a metaphor for that shift of attention. Because of course, what do the environmental puzzles do? It's so shocking. You look up and you're thinking of all these things as different three-dimensional objects, and then you see there's like this sense of flatness because they all come together in a perfect flat shape, which is a reminder that this 3D world is represented as a flat two-dimensional visual field in your awareness. And the negative space aspect of these environmental puzzles in the sound area makes that even clearer, because there literally is no object. It's not like you're seeing an object from an elongated side perspective that makes it look like a circle. It's like there is no object here, and the coincidence of this making the shape is just like it happens because of the way that vision represents 3D objects as a 2D field of view plane in awareness. So it's kind of a direct reminder of your first-person visual experience. And how does the game? There's the game mechanic that represents that is not just tracing the lines, but it's also this freezing mechanic where you press and then you have this cursor that moves around. A cursor is like on a 2D desktop, right? Versus without, you've got the 3D navigation of moving and strafing and things like that. But you freeze the world, you're navigating it in 2D, and you have this frame around here which reminds you that, you're at a monitor. So you sitting and watching this YouTube video, when you see this frame, you just think like, oh, hey, like I'm looking at the boundaries of my phone or the boundaries of my TV, and I can see like, papers stacked up next to it on the desk and stuff. So that's that's what this mechanic is here for, is as a reminder. Like, that's why there's this frame around here, is to symbolize this has been framed like a picture. It's flat. This is on a screen. You're seeing a screen. You're seeing all the things beyond the screen, even though you haven't been paying attention to them. Remember that you have this first-person field of view and this conscious awareness. And that's kind of what the game is saying every time you freeze the screen like that. Interestingly, there's another game that I really love. I love puzzle games, so if you love Portal, then you will be delighted by this little game Perspective that is also about 3D kind of moving around, and then you line things up in the right way, and then you freeze, and then the 3D scene becomes a 2D platform game that you have to get your guy through. It's really delightful, and it uses the same exact mechanic that The Witness. It's the only other game I've ever seen that does this kind of freezing mechanic. So you might be interested in it if you like The Witness and like puzzle games. But for now, let's move on, and there's one more audio log that we're going to talk about, and then we're going to talk about the puzzles.
The glass is transparent, the wine transparent. The two are similar, the affair confused. There seems to be wine and no glass, or glass and no wine. Sahib bin Abad, circa 990.
So this is also, like so many quotes in The Witness, it's got multiple things going on. I guess we're gonna hear that bird plenty, so we'll stay outside. But it's got a lot going on. So the glass is transparent, the wine transparent. This is also a metaphorical thing. So I think these two audio logs are so interesting because they're right there. First of all, they're obviously in dialogue with each other, but they clearly represent they're talking about this specific environmental puzzle, because these two audio logs are like very, very close to the point that you would find the environmental puzzle. They're almost placed here in order to make you stop so that you're more likely to then look up and realize what's going on. So the two audio logs are in dialogue. One is Taoist. The other is from a Sufi, which is the mystical branch of Islam, and Sufism is. And so they're in dialogue with each other. They're related to this, and they're both talking about a physical thing in the world. This one is talking about empty cups and wheels, and this one's talking about the transparency of glass and wine. And they're both making a metaphor for a kind of deep philosophical, spiritual notion. And so I think what these are saying is, hey, these two things are what I'm saying with this environmental puzzle. This too is a spatial example that is a metaphor for a kind of spiritual concern or thought or inquiry. But to talk specifically about this audio log, which I really think is delightful and kind of, I don't know, romantic in a way. I like the Persian poetry stuff, but it's the transparency of the glass and the wine is, of course, a kind of playful comment about optics. It sounds like something Feynman might say, right? And Feynman does actually have a quote about wine way over in the Tetramino area, which we'll talk about in a future episode. But in this case, it was quoted so often by Sufis as a kind of mystical parable for the relationship. Apparently, I looked this up. I'm not just guessing, or don't just happen to know this as background knowledge. But I researched this quote a little bit, and it was apparently quoted by Sufis as an explanation of the relationship between God and the soul. That they're so similar that it's it becomes they're so similar, and yet like because they're so pure, because each is so pure, it becomes confusing whether they're the same thing or they're slightly different things, but they're just so similar. So I guess the wine would represent God, and the glass would represent the individual, because the individual is giving shape to this kind of infinite amorphous magic liquid that that has no shape intrinsically, but together they kind of become the same thing, right? So it's like, am I God? Is it just all glass, or do I not exist and it's only God? So this is related to the Kuza stuff and the other things we've talked about, but I don't know. It's like I said, I'm not the most eloquent at talking about the more spiritual side of things, but that's a very important quote, talking about our personal relationship, that we, not personal relationship as in like Jesus, because I don't think the witness has any time to talk about this sort of drama-filled personal gods of mainstream religions, but our relationship as individual consciousnesses. Like, what is our connection to that fundamental aspect of the universe that causes the world to exist, or that the kind of universal consciousness that might somehow exist. And the Taoism quote is also talking about that. So the final interesting thing about that quote that I learned while I was researching it is that it is actually linked very, very closely to the quote in the Monastery about veils hung down. Is nothing in existence but veils hung down, acts of perception attach themselves only to veils and leave traces in the owner of the eye that perceives them. So that quote is by Ibn Arabi, who was a kind of Arab philosopher and theologian and scientist. Back in the day, everybody was kind of, if you were a philosopher, then you kind of were a theologian and scientist as well, just thrown in there. And he was writing in 1231, and this is from 990. So these are two very different people: a Sufi mystic versus a kind of presumably non-Sufi Arab philosopher, and they're quoting each other. The witness is all about that. It's a game full of quotes, and so naturally it has some kind of playful situations. There's another audio log on the beach that prominently does this, and in this audio log, it ironically quotes the Sufi poem kind of outside the context, or it's hard to tell. You probably knew about it, but quotes it kind of outside the context of the Sufi mysticism and the metaphor about the relationship of the soul to God. Instead, it's just kind of a book about optics. It's in the Veils Hung Down audio log. He's talking about how, well, there's 4 different kinds of material veils, and the material veils are basically opaque, translucent, and transparent. And then he quotes this audio log about the, as a kind of beautiful poem, pondering the nature of transparent objects. And then he goes on in the book to talk about other kind of more spiritual veils, or veils that are based on the fact that our senses are unreliable, as opposed to the different shapes in the world. But it's kind of a fun, like, Aristotle-type categorization of objects into opaque, translucent, transparent, and then he also talks about mirrors and polished surfaces. So that's that for these quotes. But you can see there's just so much going on in the witness. I just love it so much that you have this thing. It's like this simple kind of wordless, silent statement, and it stands totally by itself as a shape. But then it's tied to this like beautiful scholarship from all of these different centuries coming together, and and there's these cross connections with the different areas, like the fact that this is the jungle lends the theming to the jungle and all that stuff. So it's just amazing. And there's even more. There's more we'll talk about later when we get to other environmental puzzles. But for now, we're going to continue through this beautiful jungle and try and find some puzzles. But we won't actually find any because we'll find this beautiful, amazing tree, which of course is an important part of the kind of 3D shape. You know, you can imagine the environmental puzzle like shining through here, right? Because it has to, there has to be nothing between like that point where you stand, where your head is going to be, and then like shoo, you can imagine all the rays of that question mark shape shooting through here. You can kind of see around there, like somebody had thrown out like flying chainsaw discs, cutting all of the leaves in the shape of that question mark. So I don't know. So it's fun to picture how that shaped the whole forest. But we have this beautiful tree, and you know, we can walk through. And the first 4 or 5 times when I was playing the game, just for the very first time, I ran through here so often without even realizing that there are like a bunch of puzzle panels here. It would seem so obvious, but I swear I ran through here, you know, at least 4 times without realizing that there was anything there. I think because you come through this part, you kind of do all, you're looking around at the forest, you look at this amazing tree, but then by the time you get here, you're like excited to keep going and see what's through here. So they're made with this camouflage paint because, of course, this is a sound area. They're trying to de-emphasize vision. Even when you do see these, which most players probably did a little bit earlier than I did, but even when you do find them, you can't start the puzzle. Like this one still has a wire coming out, and it's going way up there, and it disappears like behind a rock, and who knows what happens. So that's a bit of a mystery. Then there is a set of stairs here that is possible to see, although of course the obvious path is through here, right? The witness always loves putting like a little kind of semi-hidden path just because you weren't paying quite as much attention. But this one's easy enough to find. But yet again, just like this, where you're so eager to go through and find out what's next that you miss seeing the panels, here you're so excited to get up here to this awesome looking banyan that you're going to miss this like crazy little turn off, right? Like who would ever see this? So it's this little turn off that leads you to the first puzzle. And this isn't the only way to find it. It's also possible to find this first entrance by spotting this wire, which disappears mysteriously up a rock. But if you can follow it through this like very dark, or actually I guess there isn't anything down here, but you know, maybe if you're following this then you'd manage to see the exit, but it's like extremely hidden. So in my case I did find it by just like searching through and like Easter egging it. But I clearly the way that you're supposed to find it is by hearing the bird sound, realizing that that's weird, and then finding this speaker over here by getting closer and closer to the louder sound. And that's the thing that I don't really like about the sound area in general. Because things are so hidden, it gives this kind of Easter egg sense that you're trying to puzzle things out, as opposed to other areas that are laid out more transparently. And I realize why the game is doing this, to de-emphasize the visual sense, but it just, I don't know, maybe if that first bird sound had been like louder, then it would have changed my experience a bit, or more unusual, not louder, but you know, yeah. But anyways, we're going to start the sequence of puzzles. So of course they're very well spaced out because they have to be far enough apart that you don't get the sounds mixed up from them. So here we've got a nice, you know, it's a high-low bird chirp, and this is one of those ones where it's so easy, there's so few paths that it's easy to just trial and error the solution. So we have a high chirp and a low chirp. And then these next ones confirm for us that they confirm what we might suspect with that first panel, which is that the puzzles are about sorting the notes by, you know, how high or low they are. So here we have high, high, low, and now there's a middle tone that's new. You'll notice that the sounds play at slightly different intervals, and sometimes they're a little bit stretched out to help keep things from being super annoying. So now we've got yet a longer code. Let's listen to it again. That sounds like mid, mid, high, low, low. Mid, mid, high, mid, low, maybe? There we go. So now we can follow this down. So of course this is a pretty funny joke, that you've got a bird calling, but then you're ready to plug it in, but then you have this super annoying cell phone sound that goes off right in the middle of trying to hear the bird, which is, it's commenting on, it's both a legitimate additional game challenge that now you have to listen to the two sounds at once, and it's also just a commentary on like the annoying sounds of the modern world. This is a fun little nook here. But let's try and listen carefully and hear the two sounds at once and sort them out. Kind of sounds like this, but I'm not sure. Let's give it a little bit. High, high, low, mid, low. Maybe like that. Yeah. Nice. So even though this is bothering us with the cell phone sound so much that I'm gonna try and move away, that's also a tie-in to why the sound area is particularly meditation themed, right? It's de-emphasizing the visual stuff that is so important, the visual details that are so important elsewhere in the witness, and there's no human structures here. I guess some people made some stairs, but there's not like an elaborate structure representing all the details of a specific philosophy. So both of those point towards kind of a wordless first-person experience, but also the sound is a particularly a good object of meditation. It's different from vision, and so much of the witness is about vision. I mean, that's kind of the two things games can do. They can't produce like weird bodily sensations in you or anything, So many of the puzzles have been about either the details of how like color and light and shadows work, or else they're about these abstract mechanisms of like logical operators. But sound is a particularly is a sense that's more amenable to meditation than either thoughts, which are infinitely distracting, and so they're kind of the worst object of meditation, although it's possible, or vision, because we're so immersed in vision. Vision's our primary sense, and vision creates this. Even though the environmental puzzles did there to remind us about kind of the flatness of our visual fields. But it's vision that gives us this strong sense of separateness, that we're in here and we're seeing all these things out there, that things have different places, that objects are separate from each other. I mean, all of which is true in a kind of physicsy way, but it's experientially false in the sense that the way we see things, we don't see separate objects. We see just like kind of pixels in our visual field, and then our brain performs all this processing, and that's reported to us as separate objects, but kind of the raw incoming sense data is not as separate objects, and is not as three-dimensional space, but as two-dimensional space. Versus sound doesn't have as many of those problems. Sound is unexpected. When you hear a new sound, sounds, they show up and then they go, and you can't hold on to them for even a moment longer than they last. you can hear multiple sounds at once, like in that cell phone puzzle. So, and all of the sounds, humans can identify the spatial location of sounds, of course, but it's not as easy as with vision. It's much more loose, and it's easy to kind of ignore that. And so sound has this sensation of happening all at once, all in the same place. Like if you just sit in like a park and you hear real birds that aren't coming from speakers chirping, and you hear cars passing, and maybe you hear a lawnmower going, and you hear the wind through the trees, all those things are kind of, they're all happening in the same place in your head, you know, as if you had earphones in. So that ephemeralness and that unifiedness, that they're all happening together, even though it's this unexpected sequence of sensory impressions that you have no control over, makes them a more kind of a valuable object of meditation, versus it's more difficult to look with vision and connect with that same sense of unity of consciousness, because just vision is so distracting, I guess, and it has all these little details that have such a strong sense of separateness. So that's why sound is related to the meditative themes of this area. But let's keep going to the next puzzle. Okay, so now it's even crazier. We got like springs, there's broken windows, there's cymbals crashing. The cell phone is still going, but in between all that, we're also, it's throwing a new mechanic at us. We've got this elongated note now, so we can try and pick up on. It sounded like high, low, mid, mid. So there is a lot of craziness going on here. Alright, now we've got like wolves. Alright, let's see. And now fortunately all that's come to an end. Sorry that I have to pause so much. Obviously I have to wait to hear the sound. So this is quite interesting because you're listening to the bird. You just learned about the elongated note, but I think the bird call doesn't match the elongated note. Like it has an elongated note, but it's not in the right place. Maybe it does. Cheap. Yeah, let's see. No, the bird note. Okay, so the bird sound in this has 5 notes, and this is clearly only portraying 4. And so what we have to do is we have to realize, just after we finish, like, oh my god, like, shut up with the cell phone and the breaking windows and stuff, we have to realize that actually we're not supposed to listen to the bird sound. We're supposed to listen to the kind of wolf howling at the moon sound. Or maybe it's another bird, I don't know. But it has 4 notes is the important thing, and it has an elongated note in the right place. So that sounds like low, mid, high, low. Ah! Okay. Alright, so I finally got it. I kept thinking this was low, but of course it's the same as this sound, so I can't. I'm bad at this. Okay, so this is another interesting one. We got 2 birds again, and this time they both have 4 notes, I think. So now we can't just roll one out because of the note. We've got to pay attention to where the long note is in the song. And the crazy thing is that there's one bird whose song is like very easy to hear and sounds like all the other birds, and then there's this crazy like warbly bird that sings the notes in super quick succession. It kind of sounds like it's just all one sound. It's very fast, and we have to kind of mentally slow it down in order for it to make any sense. I'll be quiet to... So we get the one bird that's like, you know, dee da dit dit, which would be like a high elongated note, and then a low, and then like 2 mid notes or something like that. But it just doesn't fit because the elongated note is clearly last and not first. So we've got to listen to that short one. Fortunately, thanks to Caitlin on the Witness Discord, which is a fun Discord that you could join, I have a slowed down version of that bird sound that like plays so fast. So you can listen to it here. I'll play it for you. Alright, I'll play that again. So that's the sound that we're trying to pick out. It's so fast, and of course ordinary people are not going to record it and slow it down. Thanks, Caitlin, for doing that, because I think it helps make this a much clearer demonstration. But that's just another, you know, the game is pointing out to you that you can hear all this detail, you know, that something sounds like this fast kind of warbly thing actually, or, well, you can hear it, maybe I can't hear it, but one in general can hear all this detail that you put into the, that goes into the sound. So that sounds like low, high, mid, low, but stretched out. I mean, compressed, so it's very fast. Oh no, I screwed up, okay. Alright, so after like about 1 billion tries, I finally got it. I cut those all out for you because it was very tedious, and I'm extremely bad, and I thought that the last note was low instead of high, so I'm a mess at this, even with the slowed down version, which is partly, you know, why I became frustrated at this area and didn't like it that much. But there we go, there's the sound puzzle. So now we can move on to a more, a nicer, so we can see that this like goes like soaring up this insane cliff, goes up to what I think is a more fun area, and then we have like all this craziness that then like once you're almost punished once this happens, because then you have all the sound that goes off whenever you run through. But anyways, so we can follow that line way up here, and it's actually kind of difficult to follow. Like, what is that? You know, like, okay, so it goes up there. I don't know. But eventually we end up on like tracing through the tree to this little sign over here. And then something unusual happens. So this is like a little trap door. Easy to not notice, just totally camouflaged, even more so than the earlier ones. And we get this, and then it opens. It's a wall. We can't go through it. So that's also something that I don't really like about this area. Is it prevents you from. It makes the world less navigable over time as opposed to more, which is a shocking departure, because usually in video games like this, you're like opening doors and you're getting new access to areas. But now you've lost access to an area, so that's kind of very surprising. And I'm not sure what that means thematically. So if you guys have a good thought on that, then you can comment on it, because it's clearly intentional. Like, he could have put a little side path through there, but it totally blocks off the path, and I wonder why. Anyways, the puzzle mechanics of this unfortunate wall are more interesting, because they're bringing the sound puzzles together with hexagon puzzles and that more logical approach of the rest of the island. So here we got a bird clearly giving a high and low chirp. it's actually preventing us, just so we don't get confused, like does the big one stand for a high note? It's only possible to collect the low note and then the small note and then the big note, which confirms that it's high, low is the way to go. Now we've got the same thing, but we have many options. So it's high, low. Now we get something more complex. So we get mid, mid, high, low, mid. And we got to decide how we're going to do that. Are we going to get these two first? Mid, mid, high, low? No. Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, so I had this one wrong earlier based on my perception of the sound, of course, rather than my logic. It's not mid, mid, high, low, mid. It's mid, mid, high, mid, low. So mid, mid, high, mid, low. Everything's good. Now we've got another interesting twist. We got two birds, but only one set of hexagons. So we got to decide which bird is telling it like it is, and which is leading us astray. Fortunately, that's possible because there are 4 notes in this sequence, and the birds are kind of phase shifted. So sometimes they'll be on top of each other, like right then. Other times you can get them independently. So one of those birds has 5 notes, and which is obviously useless in this situation. The other one has just 4 notes, and it's high, mid, high, low. Yeah, high, mid, high, low. So how are we going to do this? How about high, mid, high, low. Now we're in even bigger trouble because both birds in this case have 5 notes, and so we've got to figure out what the distribution of notes is. Right? This we've got 2 high notes, 2 low notes, and 1 mid note. Only one of those birds has the correct distribution of high and low notes. So like one of them might have 3 high notes and only 1 low note, which obviously is not useful for this panel. Okay, so the ultimate code is going to be high, high, low, mid, low. Wait a second, yeah. And now this final and most complex one, in this, we have, both birds have the correct distribution of notes. So in the previous one, there was one bird with 2 highs and 2 lows and 1 mid, and then there's one bird that had 3 mid notes, which obviously doesn't work. We only have 1 mid note there. But here, both birds have 2 highs and 2 lows, but one of the patterns is actually impossible to complete. So I'm going to take a moment and write down what those patterns are, and then we'll try to complete it with the one bird, and then try to complete it with the other bird. Okay, so one of the birds is going high, low, mid, which doesn't work out on the panel. You can try and do high, low, but then when you do your second pattern of high, low, you've locked yourself off, right? Or high, low, high-low, there's no way to go around, versus the bird that we want goes low, mid, high, which allows us to just clean off that corner and get rid of that troublesome mid note, and then so it's low, mid, high, low, high. So that finally is the sound area completed. Hopefully it was less tedious for you than it was for me, because I've edited out all the parts where I got horribly stuck. And now we can return to more of what I totally love about the sound area, which is the beautiful environmental puzzles that are all over the place. Like there's one that seems so tantalizing right here, but how do I fill it in? I need like a little leaf or something. Let's see, so we've got like one here. So this is a beautiful like banyan tree. I like this one for going all the way up over the top of me. But then we have, I mean, this is also, I love some of the playgrounds of the environmental puzzle sections, because when there's just one, a lot of time they just sneak in one because they saw something that looked kind of like a circle, or they saw a special opportunity and it was just too good to pass up. But these playgrounds are opportunities for them to say like, hey, there really is a whole game here. There's so much that you can do, kind of mechanically about this. I wonder if this makes like a spiral shape. So here we've got sort of one path crossing another, although it's like, in what sense are they crossing, right? Like there's some abstract 3D sense in which you have a vertical line here, and then you're like, the projections are crossing, but of course they do not, the paint doesn't actually cross. There's plenty of space there. There's a couple others around here, and they must be that must have been that one that I couldn't get earlier. How are we gonna put this together? Ah, okay. It's a fake, right? They're faking me out by putting this convenient circle edge, and I'm thinking like, oh, I gotta back up to find something, but there's just a giant rock there, and there's no convenient leaves over there. But over here, I can find the rest of that circle. But it's so tantalizing. There must be something here. Although, okay. So I guess this is another hint. If you actually, this looks so temptingly like a path, but then if you actually follow it up, it doesn't end in a doesn't end in the little half dome. So I like this banyan tree a lot. It's a mirror of the it's the same banyan species that that is also present in the monastery. So it kind of is drawing the connection of those meditative themes between the sound area and the monastery. It's larger, it's older, it's not as dying, I guess, and it looks so tantalizingly like you could climb on the branches somehow, but that never happens, unfortunately. There is another one that I missed somehow. All right, but we'll leave it for now. We're not trying to track down every environmental puzzle in this area, just the ones that I think are interesting. But I do feel like I've de-emphasized them a little bit, and I've skipped some important stuff in earlier series. This is another kind of interesting negative space one. It's not the sky, but there are all these puzzles where we're tracing out the paths in stone. And then we have all the stone around here, and then here we're tracing out paths in the places where there aren't any stone, where the outlines are made by stone. So that's kind of a cute little inversion, and it's also that inversion theme continues in that environmental puzzle, because here you have an expanding series of squares that are adding height to these steps, versus here the steps are getting smaller and they're cutting away. cutting into the ground in a negative space kind of way. So then finally, that other environmental puzzle related to the tree, a twin to the earlier question mark one, is this right here. Beautiful kind of crown that frames this gigantic tree. Wait a second. Wait just a second. Look at that. just when you turn to follow it, there's that other missing guy. Clever game, man. I just can't get over this game. Right there. Bam. How funny. Alright. Anyways, back to business. So, so this area here, which includes all kinds of funny little 3D shapes. I mean, so there's a couple reasons why this is here. The first is that together with the question mark that's coming from the other direction, right? That kind of rays that determine where the leaves are from the question mark are coming across the screen from this direction, versus the rays that determine this are coming, like, they're going into the screen, coming from my point of view, and that's about a 90-degree angle. And so those two things, you could have completely independent shapes. If you've read the book Gödel Bach or seen the cover of the book, it has these wooden shapes. It's a famous cover of a famous book that we'll talk more about in later episodes. But it has these wooden shapes that have been cut out from different sides so that they have different letters each side of the cube. One will have the outline G, and then the other one outline E, and then the other one outline of the letter B. And because they're coming from from three different perspectives at 90-degree angles, you can carve any shape, and it's totally independent. And so this like big natural wild shape of this tree is actually heavily constrained by the two environmental puzzles that are linking around it. You could have a third if you stood directly beneath it. I think that'd be kind of cool to have like one that went around a ring, but it doesn't exist as it is. I also wonder about the kind of symbolism of this. I mean, one thing that's nice about it is that it totally fills the screen. The other one also does that a little bit, but this one really, it's like the exact aspect ratio of the screen. So that just kind of makes it feel so big and like all-encompassing, and very, very reminiscent of that kind of like this kind of unified like awareness of your field of view. I mean, it helps that you have this thing that's like going out to the edge of your field of view. Another thing that I wonder about is, the earlier one kind of made a question mark shape. This seems like a star shape. It seems a little bit like an 8-pointed star or something. I wonder if we could count the points. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Maybe 9 or 10 if you count these. 11 if you count this. So it's a lot of points. But it's a little bit in the direction of the sun. You can see all of this sort of like rays as coming through here, and you have this like heavy bloom effect coming through the fog. So I wonder if this is supposed to represent the sun or represent that 8-pointed star shape, or if it's just a nice fringy shape that's the shape of a tree. I guess you guys can discuss that in the comments and tell me if I'm just going too crazy, or if you think I'm onto something. So there's a little bit more of the sound area, and then we'll move on, or maybe we'll have to split it into another video of talking about the Rupert Spira audio log and the shipwreck, which is this awesome bamboo maze. So the bamboo maze is where I'm finally kind of on board. I haven't really liked the sound area so far with all the puzzles, but the bamboo maze is puzzle-less, so there's not any like of that complicated figuring out what the birds are trying to say stuff going on. But it's also where the game is its strongest in terms of de-emphasizing the visual and just giving you this. I mean, when you look straight ahead, you just have vertical lines, and it's like very hard to tell what the paths are, you kind of have to like be looking down at your feet as you're navigating this. And it's deliberately like very confusing to try and map out all of these paths. And where you end up, there's this thing that looks like a rock gate, but of course it's three-sided, and there's like these multiple little entrances, objectively it's a rather small labyrinth, but it can get pretty confusing. And at the center is this beautiful shape, which seems like it should have like some special gameplay purpose or something. People thought that this was related to some kind of big endgame secrets or some kind of connections, maybe. But it's so what's going on with this shape, this kind of dead bamboo, and the wind is blowing through it, and the wind is producing this whistling sound, and there are a couple important things about this area that's at the center of this maze. First of all, when you get here, you're maximally confused because you're in the middle of the maze, and so this twisty, kind of mysterious, kind of spooky sound is a bit of a nod to the fact that you're in the center of this confusing, twisty maze. These sounds are actually, it's like very carefully chosen to be a sequence of sounds known as Shepard tones, which you can look up. It's kind of an optical illusion, or rather an auditory illusion, where you can play a certain sequence of notes, and it'll sound like the notes are continuing to get deeper and deeper in pitch over time, but it's just an illusion, and you can continue playing the sequence of notes over and over repetitively for hours on end, and it'll always sound like it's getting lower and lower, but of course it doesn't actually, if a sound actually continues to get lower and lower, then eventually it would move out of the range of human hearing, so you could only do that for like a minute or two. But this produces this very eerie effect, which I'll let you observe for a moment. So this functions in a way as a kind of last-minute curveball. You know, I always love like the final puzzle that throws something totally new at you in the witness, and you could imagine some kind of panel. It's like a last-minute curveball, but without a puzzle panel. You could imagine giving somebody a puzzle panel and asking them to trace out what the tones are, right? Because we've just spent the last half hour saying like high, mid, low, low, mid, high, and now we're faced with this thing that is uncategorizable. Like we can't assess whether it's high or low because it feels to us like the tones are just getting lower and lower over time, and which is like hilarious as a curveball, but also emphasizes the fact that we are subject to optical illusions, that our senses are not totally reliable, and that, you know, we can listen to these thing that sounds crazy objective, like the pitch of different sounds. It seems like you just run that through a audio analyzer, and in fact, of course, it is objective, but like the details of the Shepard tones are known. You know, you can look up like the audio file that plays this sound in the game files, and it'll have some structure. It's not magic, but the fact that we are compelled by this illusion, that we can't help but hear the sounds getting impossibly lower and lower, even when we know that they aren't getting lower and lower, is a reminder of how much of our sense experience is constructed, and how much is just is that we aren't just directly accessing the truth of physical reality, right? That there's this complex stream of processing that goes on, so the Shepard tones represents that in an auditory sense, And then in a kind of visual and spatial sense, even though there's no cheating going on, like with the bamboo, they're not like secret portals or like non-Euclidean geometry or, you know, tessellating spaces like there actually are in the caves beneath the Witness. But just the fact that it's so confusing and looks so similar and it's so easy to get lost makes the bamboo area, it sort of causes you to start doubting your spatial senses. You know, your sense of navigation seems kind of in a way analogous to these Shepard tones, like, oh, I'm just going around in circles. I thought I was going in the same place, but I've just ended up in the same place where I started. So I think that's the main meaning of this statue, is as a final curveball and a reminder of all those things that the kind of auditory illusion tells us about our perception. Another thing that happens in this area, of course, is if you're not looking at your feet, then if you're just looking horizontally, then it's like this impossible to navigate system of vertical lines. So you might be compelled to look upwards, and there you would find yet some more beautiful negative space environmental puzzles hidden in the bamboo. You know, we've got a nice blue color to those, color of the sky, and then another one on this side. So this is also kind of funny because it's this looping shape, right? So it's a little bit confusing, like it's like, wait, didn't I already get that one? So that's kind of nice. Final thing I'll say about this, it's a braid, so, you know, how can you put a braid in a game like The Witness without having it be a braid reference? I mean, there's nothing super strong about this that reminds me of original braid, except that the Shepard tone pattern of it's the same pattern that's repeating over and over, and yet it sounds like there's a progression, right? There's this illusory sense that it was a higher pitch in the past and it was a lower pitch in the future, and yet it's not true. It's pretty much the same pitch with like some slight repeating modulations over and over, and so that creates this kind of strange sense of illusion about time, where you feel the pitch decreasing, but you know that really, in the kind of objective world, just like you might philosophically think, like, well, there's no time in the objective world. We're just like looking, like all the past and present and future is equally real. Here, you might intellectually know that that the pitch is equally the same in the past and present and future, despite the feeling at the moment that it's always decreasing. So I don't know. I love braids. I love the video game braid. Play my mod braid more now than ever. It's great. Yeah. Now we can finally find a way out of this maze. Now that you've sat through my timeshare pitch. All right. So now we come to a wonderful little audio log, and it's wonderfully positioned here with this beautiful view of the mountain. We'll play that now.
If we were not able or did not desire to look in any new direction, if we did not have a doubt or recognize ignorance, we would not get any new ideas. There would be nothing worth checking because we would know what is true. So what we call scientific knowledge today is a body of statements of varying degrees of certainty. Some of them are most unsure, some of them are nearly sure, but none is absolutely certain. Scientists are used to this. We know that it is consistent to be able to live and not know. Some people say, how can you live without knowing? I do not know what they mean. I always live without knowing. That is easy. How you get to know is what I want to know. This freedom to doubt is an important matter in the sciences, and I believe in other fields. It was born of a struggle. It was a struggle to be permitted to doubt, to be unsure. And I do not want us to forget the importance of the struggle, and by default, to let the thing fall away. I feel a responsibility as a scientist who knows the great value of a satisfactory philosophy of ignorance, and the progress made possible by such a philosophy. Progress which is the fruit of freedom of thought. I feel a responsibility to proclaim the value of this freedom, and to teach that doubt is not to be feared, but that it is to be welcomed as the possibility of a new potential for human beings. If you know that you are not sure, you have a chance to improve the situation. I want to demand this freedom for future generations. Richard Feynman, 1963.
So that quote might sound a little bit familiar to you, because part of that quote actually shows up in the Richard Feynman theater video, the beginning part of that quote, and then I think the video kind of cuts off before when he says, "How you get to know is what I want to know," and the audio log continues through, "I want to demand this freedom for future generations." Why is it here, right? I just finished talking about how this whole area is themed all about this sort of kind of meditative first-person awareness, and then we have this Feynman quote. Feynman is kind of the hero of the hierarchical science side of the island, and it's here for a couple of reasons. First off, it has this beautiful view of the mountain, right? So the mountain represents a goal, and it especially represents putting together all those different fields of knowledge in a very Feynman-y kind of scientific process. So it's a view. Feynman's, in a way, he's alluding to the goal of science, and down here, since we're not on top of the mountain, that represents ignorance and a lack of knowledge and doubt and the need to inquire. So it's appropriate in that sense that the scientific video is here. But I also think that it is relevant that this is part of this bamboo area. For instance, I mean, there are lots of places with good views of the mountain. It could have been placed like right over there, or it could have been placed like just beyond the bamboo, like over there in the middle of the river. In those fields out there. Nice little hidden door, continuing the theme of the hidden stuff in the bamboo area. But they could have placed it like right there. That has an equally good view of the mountain. But they placed it in here, in this spiritually aligned jungle zone, which I think is I was saying earlier about how the monastery is kind of didactic, and it's all about teaching people and explaining things and like passing on the teachings, versus the forest is more, or this jungle is more alive. It's more immediate and relevant. It's a little bit more silent in a way, even though it's full of noise, because it's about examining your own experience directly, right? Like examining these illusions, examining listening to all of these sounds at once, and it's. I think the Feynman quote is here because Jonathan Blow is applying that philosophy of doubt to religion and spirituality, and he's saying that this isn't a fight between science where we do things by our own, by ourselves, and we don't trust other people, and we build things based on evidence, and then religion, which is like some kind of passed down teachings from the ancient masters. No, both of these are places where we need to look with our own experience, and in some ways, with meditation, it's even more direct than any science could ever be, in that you're directly examining the raw sense data, which is the only thing you can be certain of, so that. I think the Feynman video is here to emphasize that same philosophy of doubt needs to be applied to examining our awareness, and to all of our thoughts about religion and spirituality have to be grounded in what we can observe, and not just on teachings and things passed down. Here's that laser, which is concealed from view almost completely. Some of them are very easy to see from far away. Other laser boxes only show up right when you found them. And of course it's decorated with the little kind of sound file wave pattern from the puzzles. So I'll probably have to split this up into 2 episodes, but it'll really be one connected thing, because next up I'm going to go over to the shipwreck area and talk about Rupert Spira and talking about the environmental puzzles over there in the shipwreck, which are fascinating and beautiful. And then, of course, we're going to watch the Rupert Spira video, which is probably the second most interesting video in the game after The Secret of Psalm 46, of course. But I really like the Spira video. I like it more than the Feynman video, more than the Burke video. Because it was so new to me, and I had already seen the Feynman stuff. But for now, thanks for watching, and tune in again soon, so that you can catch up with Rupert Spira and what's going on that big shipwreck out there. See you then.